Maximize Business Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Jim Roddy, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. Now, you might recall I've been on the Maximize Business Value podcast before, first to talk about my newest book, The Walk-On Method to Career and Business Success, and recently to talk about when I exited my first business back in 1998. So now you might be wondering why I'm sitting here in the host chair today. Well, this is a hostile takeover of the Maximize Business Value podcast. A team of international hackers has helped me break into Tom's system. He can't get rid of me, so we decided, well, we might as well record something and share it with people. So actually, the reason I'm here is to wrap up the series, Tales from the 17% Club. I'm going to interview Tom about one of his many successful exits. So Tales from the 17% Club is a series of interviews with business owners who have successfully transitioned their businesses. As Tom has said once, if not 5,000, if not 50,000 times, 83% of attempted business transitions fail to reach a finish line, meaning only 17% are successful. So in this series, Tom has interviewed people who have successfully sold their businesses, so you can learn more about the process and hear some very interesting stories. Today, we are turning the tables. Tom Bronson, welcome to Maximize Business Value.
Thank you for welcoming me to my own podcast.
It's like welcome you into your own home. Actually, I was curious how it feels for you, because it's almost like when you sell your business, right? And then you go back and see how that business is doing. It's a little weird that someone else is kind of wearing your slippers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I hadn't really thought about it that way. It is like I've many times walked through the halls of the businesses that I've sold afterward and just been in awe. It's almost like, if you remember, when you went on to high school and you were in junior high and you really thought that the building was so huge and the halls were wide, and then you go to high school and then you go back to visit the junior high and you realize, God, how did they fit all these people into this tiny little space, right? So it is a little bit surreal. So I'm in my own home and I'm a guest.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. And my brother-in-law just shared with me, he managed a Steinmart store in Pittsburgh for, well over a decade. They ended up closing the store, and now a Spirit Halloween, reopened. So he's like, well, I'm going to go and haven't been there in a while. And he said it was spooky to go back there. And I was kind of like, well, it is a Spirit Halloween store, so like it's spooky for everybody. But yeah, different to go back. But I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from you, Tom. And so I'm familiar with your work in the restaurant software sector, but I really want to hear about one of your transactions. So which one are we going to talk about today?
So I thought about this coming into it, because I really could talk about any number of different transactions, but one of my favorites was a business called Diagnostic Imaging, and this would have been way back, and we sold that business in 1997. So that's the one I think we should talk about today.
Great. And so tell us about Diagnostic Imaging, like all the details behind it, and as clear a picture you can paint in terms of what they did and everything behind it.
Sure. Diagnostic Imaging was actually a group of companies that we put together, but let me back up. In the imaging space, we were in the medical imaging distribution space. So we were delivering, back in the day when you had X-ray film and chemicals and things like that. Today it's almost all digital. But back in the day, we were a distributor of X-ray film, chemicals, contrast media, X-ray equipment, from all the way from veterinary X-ray to big complicated CTs and MRIs and things like that. Our business was formed in 1995 when several businesses like mine, my brother and I took over a family-owned business in 1989 that was doing about $2 million in revenue. We grew it to $20 million over the next 5 or 6 years. By the way, part of that growth was inorganic. We did do one relatively small acquisition, but we grew that business to about 20 million. But we were feeling the pressure from the one and only big national distributor of our products. At the time, and I think probably still, many of the hospitals and medical facilities were buying products through group purchasing organizations, GPOs, we called them. And there was one national player that did what we did, and they were getting all the big national contracts, therefore squeezing us out because member hospitals all over the country were buying on these contracts. And I said, something's got to give. We need to grow so that we can compete with this big company. So we reached out to 4 or 5 other business owners in the Southeast who were doing exactly what we were doing. We were based in the Carolinas, Charlotte covering North and South Carolina, a little bit of Georgia and Virginia. We contacted one in Jacksonville, Florida, one in South Florida, and one in Birmingham, Alabama. So 4 companies, I guess, total. And we said, hey, are you guys feeling the same pressures that we are? And if so, why don't we find a way that we can work together so that we can go after these contracts? So the very first meeting that we called of these like-minded business owners was on July 17th. It was like a red letter day. I remember it every year, July 17th. And at that meeting, we talked about how do we come together? Can we form just a coalition? And we decided at that meeting that we would figure out a way to combine our businesses into one business so that we would have a powerhouse in the Southeast that could command some attention. And so there we were in that meeting, July 17th. We closed that transaction on January 2nd. 1996. So that's less than 6 months. The only help that we had was from our attorney who wrote the documents, right, to combine the businesses. We didn't have investment bankers. We didn't have CPAs. We had attorneys because we were all like-minded, and we agreed to a valuation methodology that we would apply to every business, and the shares that you would get on January would be your percentage based on the valuation methodology that we applied. And so it was fair to everybody. And it was what was called, and what's still called, a tax-free stock exchange. We all just tendered our shares of stock in our own company, got shares of the new co on January 2nd, and Diagnostic Imaging was born. So 6 months from beginning to end. There you go.
Great. No, and so at that time, so it's essentially Diagnostic Imaging is a combination of 4 companies. At that point, how many total employees? How much revenue? Things like that. How big were you?
I don't have exact employee account. We were 60 million in revenue, and we had probably, I'm going to guess, around 400 employees at that point. And we were covering from basically Virginia to South Florida to a little bit into Mississippi. So we had good coverage of the Southeast.
Right. So well beyond obviously a mom and pop. That's what I wanted to get a gauge in terms of how big a business we were talking about. And then if you don't mind me asking, like, how was the management structure? Like, if you have 4 people, was it you always take a vote on 4, or was one put in charge? How did that work, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, so what we agreed to do, that's a great question. We were concerned about that. The 4 original CEOs became the board of directors, right? So they formed it. But then among them, I was the youngest and had the most energy and basically had the idea. And so they asked me to step up into a senior leadership role, but we were smart as well because we hadn't run a business that size at that point. So we hired an external CEO, somebody who was very familiar to all of us, who had spent time in the space. And so we hired a CEO, and I came in as executive vice president. We moved the headquarters to Jacksonville, Florida, opened up an office with 2 people, 2 empty offices, with a computer and a desk. and that's where we established our headquarters. And why you think Jacksonville, Florida? Well, if you looked at a map of the Southeast, that was almost the epicenter of where we were, right? We went way south to South Florida, we went north up to North Carolina, and west over to Alabama, and the CEO we hired was in Jacksonville. And by the way, there was no such thing as remote working at the time.
Right.
How things have changed. And so I literally uprooted my family and moved to Jacksonville, Florida. And on January 2nd, we closed the deal. And January 3rd, I was in my new office.
Got it. So it's 1997. So you've got the organization formed. So did you and the group have a clear exit strategy, and did you have a timeline in terms of where you wanted to take it and how you wanted to exit?
Absolutely. Our exit strategy was to first raise some capital. We needed to raise some funds to go out and let me finish on the other management. This is important. So we were running the company, but each of the other CEOs or GM became the GMs of those operating units. We still, because we didn't have combined systems yet, right?
Okay. Yeah.
We didn't have anything combined. So my brother ran the operation in South Carolina. The guy who was the CEO in Alabama and South Florida and Jacksonville, those guys all became the general managers of their own division. So exit strategy, yes. We were smart. Really, because I have one of my early mentors to thank for that. I've never gotten into any business without first understanding my exit strategy, or at least having an idea of what the exit strategy should be. Well, nobody was buying companies in that space at that point, but similar to the space that you and I shared, the technology space for restaurants and retailers that you serve at the RSPA, it was ripe for a roll-up. We had aging owners, selling products across the country with no real exit strategy, and nobody buying dealers, right? Nobody was buying any dealers. So we knew that our space was ripe for a roll-up because we could find a bunch of willing sellers. So we wanted to raise capital, go out and do a few acquisitions, because our intent was to get the company to what we called the magic number was 100 million. At the time, it's not true today, but at the time, you really, as a general rule, in order to do an initial public offering or an IPO, which is an exit strategy, you needed to have about 100 million in revenue to get anybody's attention. So our decided plan was to grow the business organically and inorganically through acquisitions, get to that 100 million, and then start down the path of taking the company public. Now, so we have a plan. Well, a year later, that plan changed dramatically when a knock came at the door, and Pat Kelly at PSS, at the time it was called PSS, it later was renamed PSS World Medical, came and visited because they were also a Jacksonville-based company. And he said, "Hey, I'm watching what you guys are doing. I'm looking at the press on what you're doing. You don't have to do this alone. I've already gone through the pain and the expense and the cost to take my company public. Why don't you combine with us? And then you can use our stock to go out and execute the strategy that you want to, just like we did in the small goods medical space." And so they were serving doctors' offices coast to coast, with 100 locations. They had already rolled up that space. And so they approached us and said, "Why don't we go and do it that way, as opposed to you having to do all the work to take the company public?"
Got it. So when they said combine with us, this is, when I hear about like there's a merger, and I'm like, did one actually acquire the other, right? And they're just saying merger in a nice way. How did this work out from when you said, you were, combining with us? Did they actually purchase Diagnostic Imaging? Is that how that worked, or what was the deal?
Yeah, that was the plan. They were going to buy us using their publicly traded stock, and then we would have access to that stock to use as our trading commodity. So, there's a number of different ways to buy businesses. One of them is to pay cash for it, right? Go borrow money, or if you have cash in the bank, go pay cash for it. But another method that's used commonly by publicly traded company is issue more stock. You already know the value of the stock because it's publicly traded, and issue shares to the shareholders and let them trade their shares for your shares, and then you acquire the company. That's exactly the method that we settled on. So yes, they were going to acquire us, called it a merger, but they weren't going to acquire us and run us under the PSS brand. They understood, at least a very little bit, which we would discover later. They understood that we were serving a market that was slightly different from their market. We were focused only on radiology, so we were serving radiologists, orthopedic surgeons, doctors' offices that had radiology, but the bulk of our business was in the hospital space, and they had no experience. So the method that we agreed to was, they could acquire us with their publicly traded stock, but we would become a wholly owned subsidiary of PSS, renamed PSS World Medical, that would have a diagnostic imaging unit, a physician sales and service unit, and at the time they had Global Med, which was in Europe. Eventually, they also bought an extended care unit, which was called Gulf South. And so their vision was to buy into the industries that were ripe for a roll-up, that were highly fragmented and had aging owners with no exit strategy, and just go out and march across and buy those and roll them into those different business units.
Got it. Thanks for that detail. That helps paint a clear picture for sure. So this is a deal that somebody could say fell out of the sky for you and your partners, or it was literally opportunity knocking at your door, right? And you just opened up and there they were. So after you were approached by PSS, what was the reaction? What was your reaction? What was your shareholders' reaction?
We were skeptical at first. Of course, we knew who PSS was, and part of my skepticism was with our own shareholders, right? Who tipped our hand on what we're doing and do it, because there wasn't. I mean, come on, we formed this company, and a year later they're coming after us. It wasn't like we were in the news every day. We were a privately held company still, and the skepticism caused a little bit of some rifts in our shareholders, because who's leaking information about our business and who's going after this? But we were also skeptical of, all right, what does this look like? None of us had ever been acquired by a publicly traded company, much less worked for a publicly traded company. We didn't know how it worked. We were skeptical of what would happen with their share prices. What if we sold the business at $10 and then it went to $5? So we cut our value in half pretty quickly. We were skeptical about, how long do we have to hold the shares, things like that. But I will tell you, Pat Kelly, God rest his soul, he passed away a couple of years ago. He was a salesman. He said, you know what? Don't you guys sell that? Let me come to your board meeting. And so we brought literally almost all of our shareholders at the time. And I'm trying to remember, I think we probably had 16 or 17 shareholders, because there were multiple, not only the primary business owner, but other folks in the business's own shares. And Pat came and painted a picture for us. And suddenly everybody got really comfortable with the deal, and we decided, let's move forward.
Great. So, and how long did the whole process take, from that meeting to actually closing the transaction?
It was about a year. So from that first meeting until we closed, I'm unclear. That's a great question. I should go back and look up the exact timing on that. I think it was a little less than a year, but we had a willing buyer. Their stock price, by the way, was soaring. So they could buy us with a lot of shares and get a good deal. And we had willing seller. And so we could put the deal together very quickly. But a year is still a long time. A lot of business owners think that they can, you have a willing buyer, willing seller who kind of agree in principle on the price and the methodology, but it still takes a long time to get to an actual close. So a year, to us at the time, it felt like an eternity.
Right, as you're going through it. But I mean, here we are, we're recording this heading towards the end of 2021, and it seems like people are still complaining about 2020, right? And everything we went through there. So yeah, the years can go by, the months, the quarters, they zip right on by you. So all
Yes,
right, so give us some more details. Talk about your transition team. So I'm sure you had one because you began with the end in mind and an exit in mind. So what
we
role did they play helping you through the process?
So we did with this exactly what we did when we combined our businesses, which by the way was a mistake, right? The only person on our team was our attorney. He actually is the managing partner of the firm that he's still with in Jacksonville, Florida. Just a wonderful attorney. But each individual shareholder kind of had their own attorneys from their prior businesses kind of looking at the deal, but we did not bring on accountants and financial planners and other folks. Our team was us and our attorney, and that's, if you ask me about mistakes, that's probably one of the mistakes that we made. And now
Oh,
he was awesome. He was a business attorney. That's it. Also, by the way, something that people do. They'll get latched onto their attorney, but you need a good business attorney, somebody who understands M&A transactions. The good news is that he did, and he was really good, and he helped us a lot. But we probably should have broadened that team a little bit more.
and talk about how would you have broadened that team to
Oh,
include what?
Yeah, we would have probably included some additional consultants to help us with gathering data and process. We would have certainly employed a CPA to help us better understand the tax implications of what we were doing and the future implications. We probably would have employed a financial planner or multiple financial planners who could give us insights, because even though, we all owned publicly traded stocks in our portfolio, we weren't experts. We should have done more due diligence on the stock price of the stock that was coming. Where is it trading? 52-year highs and lows. Where's the average? What is it? What's the trajectory? We should have read, a lot of their annual reports and 10Ks. We would have hired people that could at least give us some good insights into those things.
Got it. I want to ask you a question that kind of adds on to that, and just this is going through my own experience. So back when I was at Jameson Publishing, I was there for 18 years. We were a technology publisher magazine, and then we went and bought a web company that was one of those dot-coms. Like they raced up really fast to 2000, then we bought them when they were on the way down with only 50 employees or something like that. What we did from a Jameson standpoint for our due diligence was we took our team, like they were in Philadelphia, we were in Erie, Pennsylvania, so we drove like 6-7 hours across state in 2 different vans. We had our controllers, from our 2 different companies asking questions, our operations team, and they were just doing all sorts of that. What is your, obviously that wasn't the group that made the final decision. It was the owners. We had attorneys, who were involved. I guess, what's your thought on involving your team from a due diligence standpoint? Because it takes away from your day job, but at the same point, it really helped, us understand what we were getting into, and I think made the merger stronger for sure. But it was taxing, during the whole due diligence process. What's your take on that?
Oh, it's incredibly taxing. One of the questions we ask in our assessments with our clients is, do you have the bandwidth and the runway to work with the very high needs of a buyer, right? They're going to ask lots of questions. You're going to have to respond with data and information. I say you need to have a team in place that can handle those things. At the time, I will tell you that for me, our hired CEO, we did hire, by the way, a CFO. We needed that in place. It was completely distracting for us, and it took our eyes off of the business. And now, fortunately, we had GMs really running the distribution of the business, right? We were a distribution company. But it took our eyes off of strategic planning and thinking, and many of the initiatives that we had in place just fell by the wayside because we didn't have the bandwidth. Here's 3 guys basically doing all the due diligence work. And then our CFO, they asked for a report. Well, at the time, again, don't forget, this is a year later, we still hadn't combined all of our accounting systems. So when they wanted a report, of data, our CFO had to go to 4 different disparate systems, pull it all together, figure out how to mash this data together into some and puke it back out in a spreadsheet. And I mean, it was those days, although I look back on it fondly now, I mean, 20-hour days, 6 days a week was the norm, and we weren't running our business. We were just responding to requests.
Yep. No, I remember when we first began the due diligence process, like everybody was assigned to groups and I was like the floater, like wherever they needed me, I would jump into it. And it was like super exhilarating and making multiple trips and calls. Then we're in the actual negotiation phase. It was the owner, it was our controller, and it was me. And I just remember at the end of that week, just saying to the controller, like, let's make a blood pact. We never do this again, right? Like once we got to the end of it, we're like, the charm has worn off. And I mean, I'm glad, like you said, I'm glad we did it because it was really good to move from a print product into a web product to really fast track us on it. Unbelievable learning experience, but yeah, painful. And you're putting your your car into park, right? Your main car, and you're hopping into another one, and that thing is not moving an inch. So, well, thank you for letting me kind of. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I will tell you that the experience was like getting an MBA in acquisitions, because for you it was let's never do this again. For me, it just whet my appetite. Now I'm going, oh, all right, now I understand why we're doing these things. I was young and stupid. When you're young and stupid, it's common that you don't know that you're young and stupid, right? I didn't know that I was young and stupid until years later, and so I didn't know what I didn't know, but I was learning and absorbing everything. And it had quite the opposite effect on me. It just whet my appetite and said, man, this is something I want to do.
Just so you know, when I tell people I'm not young and stupid anymore, people say, well, it's true, you're not young anymore. And then, wait a second.
So, we all age.
We all age, yeah, but we don't all mature.
Right.
People listening to this are like, yeah, tell us something we don't know.
Exactly.
What else would you share about the due diligence process? We touched on a little bit. Is there anything more you want to share with the viewers?
Yeah, as we already said, it was a mess, right? I mean, we just didn't have data prepared, but I will tell you that they were a sophisticated buyer. They had already bought over 100 companies, so they knew what they were doing. They knew what thumb screws to use, and they put us through a ridiculous number of calisthenics, right, to get this done. But the one thing, when you ask me, about due diligence, the one thing that stuck out to me is that their group of attorneys, they had a big, powerful group, still exist, Alston and Bird out of Atlanta. And they sent one of their M&A attorneys, a young woman, to come to our corporate office. And she literally spent days reading all of our corporate documents. I mean, days. And I saw her. She had her little legal pad and she's reading stuff and she's making notes and reading and making notes. And I'm like, I don't ever want that job. But it pointed out to me that, thank goodness, we had our corporate records in order. We were new enough where we had corporate records in order, but we also had corporate records from all of these other companies, which we had gotten up to date. And it just showed to me that corporate records are important, because that was literally, after we signed our LOI, she showed up the next day and started doing that stuff. And so it was really interesting. We were worse kind of at the branch level because we were all over the board. Some of the businesses, like the one that I left behind, my brother was still running in North Carolina, was spinning like a top. The one in South Florida was spinning out of control. And so, it doesn't matter whether you're out of control or like a top, everybody was spinning. And so it was just very taxing at all levels in the organization.
Got it. And did the whole process, did it add or detract value from the sale eventually?
They knew what they were buying, and they were using pseudo money, right? They were issuing stock for us. It wasn't like they were going into their bank account. The only thing that they wanted to make sure was that, it was free money to them. All they had to do was print more stock. It's kind of like the government now, right? Just print more money. But for them, the only thing they wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be dilutive. And so the price really never changed during due diligence, but it did just at the end, and it did. So the due diligence didn't take away. They knew that we were disorganized, but we did ultimately have the retrade conversation that I talk about. The retrade is when, after due diligence, they come back and say, well, here are the things that we learned that were different than what we expected, and so we have to lower the price. Our retrade conversation had nothing to do with what they learned during due diligence. Our retrade conversation had everything to do with the fact that when we started this deal and we agreed to a price, it was based on a $33 share price of PSS. When we were about to close the deal, they started dragging their feet because their stock price started dropping for various reasons, right? Stocks are volatile, and especially a stock at that time, they were $1 billion company. So, which sounds huge, but it's still a relatively small publicly traded company. And their stock price started going, and suddenly they went quiet on us. But when they finally made it, when it looked like it finally settled at about $17, that's when they came back to us and had the retrade conversation, because they would have to issue too much stock at a $17 price versus a $33 price. And we had that horrible retrade conversation. And I will tell you, it was gut wrenching, because in essence, the value that our shareholders were going to see was going to be cut in half. They wanted to issue the same number of shares at the new stock price. And it was, it was a kick in the gut. So yeah, we did have a retrade conversation.
And how did it end up?
We ultimately settled somewhere kind of in between, but I also recognized it's important to understand what the buyer needs too. This had to be a non-dilutive transaction for them, meaning the number of shares that they issue and the addition of the size of the company, they had to at least maintain their bottom line. So understanding that metric, we got to the top of it. We never got back to the value that we wanted, but we did settle on a price. Now, tail of the tape, when you sell to a publicly traded company, there's always a collar issue that you can't sell the shares for X number of months. Typically, it's a year. In our case, it was 2 years that we couldn't sell. So, we traded now at the $17 and we got stock at $17, but we could not sell that stock. It was against the law and against our agreement for the extended time. Now, for me, fortunately, I don't know what happened, call it divine intervention or genius market timing or whatever, or dumb luck.
Dumb luck, yeah. That's what I was going with. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I actually sold all of my shares the day the price, it was just hovering at 17. It would go to 19 and down to 15. But at the end of that year, we were getting the lift in the stock market, which sometimes, the Christmas lift, the end of the year lift that sometimes happens. On December 31st, which was a trading day, our stock got up to 22.5, and I sold all of it, almost all of it. And so I got a nice lift on that. And many of the other shareholders looked at me and said, "What, are you crazy? Why are you doing this?" And then they watched the stock go down to $2.50.
Ooh.
So yeah, it was painful. So many of us did sell at a good price, and it got down to $2.50. I ultimately unloaded the balance. I don't know how many shares. It was a significant amount of shares, but I still held some because I worked for the company still, and I didn't want to sell all my stock. It went down to $2.50, and I was like, well, this is worthless. It's almost a penny stock. One day, many years later, it got up to $10, and I called my broker and I said, sell it now. When it hits $10, sell it. And he did. So I got half value for those shares that I sold.
Right. There's a certain point where there's no room in business for nostalgia, and that's what it sounds like. You reached that point where you're like, like now it's just
Cut your
something to
losses.
trade
It
in.
was
Yes.
a nice loss for me to take on my
Yeah.
taxes that year.
So before we take a break, I want to ask a question about your employees. So I'm curious how they reacted. I'm also curious how you communicated with them, right? Is this something where you walked them along the way, or is it more what I call like a Jack in the Box announcement, like dun 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 dun, dun boom, like you just
Yeah.
pop up and it's like surprise, right? Here
That
we
is a
are.
great
So,
analogy. I'm going to start using that. I'm going to go get a Jack in the Box and start using that. But
sure.
The first announcement when we combined the businesses was a Jack in the Box, and our people were kind of dazed and confused. They knew we didn't that all the same people were staying. But the second time, we told them, we're ultimately going to sell this. Help us get there, and we'll drag you along the way. There was still a bit of, gosh, we're bummed because we had a plan and here's where we're going, and we're not going to be able to get there, but now maybe we can do it. And so some were bummed, but I will tell you, probably one of the most gratifying, if I had to make a list of the top 100 things I'm most proud of in business, this would be probably in the top 10 list, and that is our next level of managers beyond the owners. The next level of managers, many of them stayed on with after we sold the business for many years and rose to running branches on their own, to running giant regions. Some of them rose to national sales level. I mean, and so those folks had opportunity that we could never give them in the size business that we were, and many of those folks retired later from that business after a long and stellar career. So ultimately it was really good for our employees, and that's one of the proud moments of my career.
That's great. And there's a book called Multipliers, which I strongly suggest that folks read. It talks about your value as a manager and a leader isn't just found in your income statement, right? It's in those people who you multiply their ability, and you really get to see how they grow down the road into something super special.
We call it the intangibles, right? The tangibles is what you can see on the balance sheet. The intangibles are things you can't see. The value of the people, the value of perhaps your intellectual property, things like that. We did a podcast on that with Lad Hirsch. It's brilliant. You should go listen to it.
Wonderful. Well, let's take a quick break. We're talking with Tom Bronson, a member of the 17% Club and the usual host of this podcast. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Don't you want to be a 17%er too? Of course you do, and we can help you get there. This fall, Mastery Partners is on a mission to unmask the value of your business with our incredible tool, the Transition Readiness Assessment, or as we like to call it, the TRA. In a simple and complicated way, the TRA unmasks where you are generating value in your business and where you aren't. This comprehensive assessment pinpoints your hits and misses so you can focus on what's working and solve what's not. What you do today matters, and will have a tremendous impact on the future value of your business. Get your TRA today and be a 17%er. Go to masterypartners.com, schedule a call with Tom, and join our TRA challenge. Don't be deceived. Uncover and know how to build massive value in your business.
We're back with Tom Bronson, and we're talking about his exit from Diagnostic Imaging in 1997. So, Tom, we've talked about a lot. Just in general, what did you learn going through the whole process? What are some of your big takeaways and lessons?
Well, if I could borrow from my good friend who I recently heard on a podcast, everything. As I said earlier, it was really kind of like getting an MBA in business transitions, in M&As, or in M&A transactions, and I learned so many important things. Maybe I can just tick off a few of these. One of them, if you've ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, it's like one of my favorite movies about sales. It's where Alec Baldwin plays the big slick, sales VP who comes in to give the motivational speech, and it's ABC, always be selling, ABC, always be selling, right? And it's like the worst and in fact, I had it on the other day. I was flipping channels and it came on, and my wife walked through, and it was right at that scene. And she goes, "What is this?" I said, "It's Glenn Ross. I mean, it's like the greatest sales movie of all time." And along with Boiler Room and a few others. But she sits down and she's not paying attention, but she's hearing what's going on. And it's right at this time when it's the guy, he's going through this motivational speech. And she looks at me and says, "Is that supposed to be motivational?" And I said, I said, "That's the beauty of this film." We used to show that to sales managers to teach them how not to be, right? So
right.
ABC, but I borrowed that ABC and I changed it to ABR. Always be ready. You never know, like us. We were just combining our business together, and you never know when an opportunity is going to come across your door. Now, I hear from business owners all the time, "Oh, I get calls every day." Yes, if you're breathing, if you're listed on any business websites, if you get any notoriety, every private equity, every business broker, every investment banker is going to be calling you. So you're going to get calls every day. It doesn't mean that you've got a real buyer on the other end of the line. We just happened to have a real buyer that knocked on our door and walked through, and we got lucky, right? But we were nowhere near ready. We knew that there were things. I would have stomped the gas pedal at the very beginning if I really thought we were going to have an exit in a year. I thought we had 3 or 4 or 5 years to build the business, take it public, and then go on about our happy way. But a real deal fell in our lap, and so a real lesson that I learned was be ready in advance. Document your processes. We had processes at our various businesses, but we'd never taken the time to really consolidate and think about what were best practices. Benchmark yourself against others in the industry, and understand what best practices are, and create the best in class processes in your business so that that can be that can be one of those intangibles we were talking about before the break that could make the business more valuable. It really gave me a clear understanding of the value of corporate records. Corporate records, so that would be thing number 3. The corporate records, because that's something that sits on the shelf. I've got a corporate record book over here on the shelf. And those are things that are easy to overlook. You're not recording all the things. You're not putting in all your resolutions. And by the way, if you have bank debt or a line of credit, you have a corporate resolution that belongs in your book. Those are simple things. Get those corporate records in order, because somebody's going to read them the way that the attorney from Alston and Bird did. Another important thing I learned was understand the buyer's motivation. I never really thought about that. I knew about the seller's motivation. I wanted cash, right? I want to sell this business and I want cash and I want to move on about my business. But really diving in, because we didn't at the beginning understand the buyer's motivation, and we didn't understand that until the stock price plummeted, and then I understood how they were valuing businesses and what their motivation was. And that would have been a big driver for me at the very beginning. If I've defined my exit strategy, which we had, and understand the buyer's motivation, that's a big lesson that I learned. And a lot of these things are things that we do in our assessment today. We've created that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's the things that are kind of out of sight, out of mind, that you don't think about, that every business doesn't. Every business has processes, but are they documented, right? Are they best in class? Have you benchmarked them? Do you know how you perform against your industry? Are you ready? Are you really, have you got these things in order? These are the things that the lessons that I learned that we've tried to really capture and consolidate into one of our products, which is called the Transition Readiness Assessment. And it's all the lessons that I've learned. So literally that assessment is 500 questions. And many of those I learned during this transaction. So we could sit here for hours and I could just tick off all of those things for you. How's that?
It might be another podcast. Question number one, right? Question number two, and just move through. But if I can expand upon one point that you said about documenting your process. So, and again, you and I have worked in the same industry, and one of the services that I provide through the RSP is called a Customer Health Checkup Merchant Survey. So we help these small businesses survey their customers, right? So it builds a system for them where every year they're getting this feedback. Well, and I was just talking to him this morning, a small business owner, he has really, really good scores, but it's because he's small and he is personally invested in every single connection. He's like, I'm never going to be able to get away from the business. And he was like looking to me for hope. I'm like, well, yeah, you're not going to if you continue down this path. And then we talked about doing some training for his team. And then the training, what's left behind in the worksheets and all that is their best practice in terms of for how do they handle a customer complaint? How do they determine outcomes? Right. And then a new employee comes in, you have something to train them on. But one of the stories he was sharing is the time he yelled at a customer. And I said to him, like, how many customers do you have to yell at? And he's like, oh, I've done it twice, over 30 years. I'm like, yeah, but if you don't have the systems in place, a new person's going to see it and they'll be like, I guess it's okay to yell at customers, right? They're not going to know. And that's how you said the spinning out of control, that's how it can do it. But if you have something to point back to, a standard, a system, like everybody is literally and figuratively on the same page, that's how you have a real business that someone can look in on and go, oh, they're a real business, as opposed to, well, if this guy gets plucked out, nothing's there whatsoever. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all, or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I love actually a couple of points, right? Number one, you touched on something that is so important that so many small businesses don't think about, and that's owner dependency, right? If you read anything about M&A transactions, you'll hear that, oh, if the business is dependent on the owner, you're going to take a haircut, right? Which means a reduction in value in the business, right? But if you're a $20 million business and it's dependent on the owner, you are going to take a haircut. Call it as much as 25 to 50% of the value. Why? Because they've got to go and replace you. If you're a small business, and we classify small businesses as kind of less than 20 million, and then micro businesses as less than 5, that is owner dependent, it's worth nothing. Nothing. Now it might be worth.
So you get a haircut, but instead of cutting your hair, they're cutting you right here, right? It's right.
Well, yeah, it looks like my hair, right? And so, that is a great point. Documenting processes. It's when you document processes, it's all about making the business more transferable to someone else. And it doesn't mean necessarily you. What happens if that one and only customer service rep leaves the company or accepts an offer somewhere else or dies, and nobody else knows how they do their job? It's about being prepared to even handing off at every level in the organization things that they can do. And one of the things that we teach our clients is document those processes. Go through something like what you explained with your how to go out and document the processes, but then use them relentlessly to train new employees, because you've got a written document. And by the way, it gives you a built-in method to update the processes as things change, right? Yes. And because you pair them up with somebody. I always say, give them a mentor, somebody who's done the job or worked in the company, and then let them kind of walk through the processes with them and go, oh, we don't do this piece anymore. Let me update that, right? And so then you hand that back to whoever updates the processes, and you keep them updated. So I think it's really important at all levels of the organization, and I think that's brilliant. Thanks for highlighting that. Processes are very important. You should go listen to our podcast we did. Sure. with Charlene Aldridge at Aldridge & Kerr about developing processes.
Good. And, you don't have to build, don't consider yourself like you're a Fortune 500 company. You need, all this, complex stuff, but you need some stuff, right? You need something to point to. So start where you're standing is good advice, and do something, get one step better.
I always say, start with the things that are in your head only.
Good point.
If something happened to you that nobody else knows how to do this, start with those things, because those are critical, and then go to your people and ask them, what are the things? And you're right, you don't have to boil the ocean. I say that a well-documented company, somebody that has processes, has gone through and identified what are the 40 or 50 critical processes in their business and they're well documented. There might be other minor processes along the way because, I guess there could be a process for opening the mail. Well, first you get your little letter opener out of your, well, that's, yeah. So, yeah. But you don't get that granular, but I've seen big companies that are that granular. But it's identify the most important things. And it starts with what's in the owner's head and anywhere that money is changing hands. So if you start in those two places, you're going to go a long way toward documenting the right processes.
Yeah, a process to open up letters in the mailroom does not add value to the business. A process for how you handle customer complaints efficiently and effectively, that adds value to the business.
Yes.
Well, thank you for letting me go down that rat hole. Though I shouldn't say, I'm the host for this, right? So I kind of have carte blanche.
Well, thank you for taking me down a rat hole.
Sure, happy to do it. So, all right. So that was talking about what you learned going through the process. Looking back, what would you have done differently? Here we are, almost 25 years after that transaction.
Well, time heals a lot of wounds, right? I will, any animosity that I had is long since gone, but I will tell you that I probably, along with some of our other shareholders, I would have told us to pump the brakes. Let's find out what's going to happen with this business. Let's continue with our additional plan or our plan. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't sell to them because they were, they're a good company and well run. They ultimately sold that business to McKesson, and many of those people are still working for McKesson. But I wouldn't have rushed the deal. We were trying to push it. I actually do. If I did have regrets, it would be that I really pushed hard on one of our shareholders, and I didn't take the time to really listen to the concern about that. I was the guy that was hurting the cats of all of our shareholders and trying to get it across the line. But we had one shareholder that I did some significant damage because I went around him to his attorney because I knew his attorney. And I said, would you put the pressure on? And I will tell you that damaged my relationship there. And so again, it's about pumping the brakes, right? I would have probably gone a little bit slower. I would have taken the time to be more intentional about how do we get the business more prepared, and I probably wouldn't have gotten caught up in the hype. One of the things about doing acquisitions, look, it's every business owner's dream, right? To build a business and then sell it. And we were about to cash in a pretty big way, right? And it was not an outstanding way, but it was a pretty big way. And it was going to deliver a lot of cash to a lot of people's bank accounts. But you get caught up in the emotion of that deal, right? You get mentally committed to that deal. That deal fell in our laps. There would have been other deals, right? There could have been other opportunities, but we got emotionally tied to the deal. And I would have figured out a way. I've learned since you can't let emotions drive a deal. The numbers drive the deal. The facts drive the deal. Dig as deep as you can and understand as much as you can, and let the emotions step out of the way. We probably made some mistakes then. Not probably. We did make mistakes then because we were emotionally tied to the deal. And I deal with this with business owners every day now. Folks that have an offer and, I'm so excited. We're going to do this and we're going to do, look at this. And I say, well, send me the letter of intent. And I go, what are you, crazy? That's not what this says. You're excited by this big, huge number, but okay, they're going to deliver you $10 at close, and then they're going to deliver you $20 a week for the rest of your life. It's kind of like, the Publishers Clearinghouse, right? That's an extreme example, but we get caught up in the emotion of it because we see these big dollar signs. I would get the emotion out of the way because it's probably the emotion that drove me to drive a wedge between me and one of the shareholders, which has long since been repaired, since. But that's probably the way I would think. I would get emotion out of the way and I wouldn't push as hard.
Great. And you mentioning about the emotion tying into your decision making, just a book that I highly, highly recommend. Like, it's in my top 5, of books that I've read, and I've read more than 5, by the way, in case people don't know me very well. Like, of course, it's top 5. He's only read 7. But if you look up Roddy's recommended reading, if you Google search that, you'll see the 100. I can't remember what it's up to now, 50 something books or more that I've read. But the top 5 is Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. They talk about the villains of decision making, and one of them is first you have to attain emotional distance before deciding, right? The period of infatuation can be intoxicating, whether it's dating to marriage, whether it's hiring somebody, whether it's selling, or anything related to the transition of a business. So Decisive by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, great book to read. It applies to so many different areas of business. So, all right. So
like you, I tear through books. I should start a 100 book club. By the way, I heard somewhere that Maximize Business Value could perhaps be on that list.
On the top 5 list?
No, on your top.
Yeah, my Roddy's recommended reading list. Absolutely, Maximize Business Value is on that list. No doubt.
I would not aspire to the top 5. That's it's like getting on the New York Times bestseller list. But I understand that. But as long as it's on the list, I think it's on. I think you let me know when you put it on the list that it's now on the list of books that Jim Roddy has read.
Yes, and recommended. I have some that I've read that I do not recommend. Don't get me started on some of those. One was recommended by.
I got to tell you, we won't do it here because it's a lot of people really like this book. But I'm reading a book right now that I'm emotionally committed to it because I'm way more than halfway through, and I'm going, come hell or high water, I'm going to finish this damn book, right?
Yeah, there's nothing like reading through something, you just put it down, you're like, what a bunch of tripe, like, oh, this is awful. So
I keep reading because it was recommended by somebody who I respect, and I'm reading it and I'm going, I've got to get to the point that perhaps a light bulb will go off for me.
I had the same thing with, again, I'm thinking about one book, I won't name it, that I read that some friend recommended. I remember getting through it and I'm like, I hope they never ask me, hey, what do you think of the book? Because I don't want to lie and I don't want to hurt their feelings. But if I have to choose one or the other, I'll hurt feelings, right? Because I'm not gonna lie. So
yep.
All right. So that was, again, a book that you can recommend, Maximize Business Value by Tom Bronson, Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. So, all right, as we wrap this up, what advice would you give? A few questions left for you, Tom. What advice would you give to business owners who are looking at transition? I mean, that's what Mastery Partners is built on. And so I'm sure you have a long answer to this, but what would be your top of mind response?
So I think top of mind right now is understand the value of your business now. Take the time to understand how businesses in your industry are trading and apply that to your business so you have at least a good thumbnail of what my business is worth. Most business owners don't take the time to think about what their business is worth. Really, they have an idea in their mind what they think it's worth, but that's almost always tied to some astronomical number that they think they need to retire on, right? And so get real about what your business is worth today, but then get with a financial advisor to find out what you really need to retire on, right? To understand then what you need the business to be worth. Right? Because if you can understand where your business is now and what you need it to be worth in order to live your life for the rest of your life in your lifestyle, then you can come up with a strategic plan to get from where you are to where you really want to be. Unfortunately, most business owners think their business is worth that magical number that they need it to be now. And I have to tell you, precious few are. There are some that are worth that, but there are many others that are, most of them, 99% of them are not worth that magical number now. So I think perhaps the best advice that I would give business owners is understand what it's worth now, understand what it needs to be worth, and then work to close that gap, right? Now, of course, that's what we do at Mastery Partners. We do an assessment of the business. It's that 500-point questionnaire that I talked about, and we walk you through it. It takes the better part of a day. We just did one for someone in the industry that you serve now. Finished up one yesterday. We spent 2 3-hour sessions together and got through all of the questions. and then I'm sending them a list of things that we're going to need to look at, and the output of that is a 40 to 50 page document that tells you what you're doing really well now, what you're not doing well, what needs to be improved, and the things that we might want to tweak, right? And it gives you kind of we call it a heat map, right, of those areas, because it's all color coded and by department. And we tell you how ready your business is today if a transaction came today. So it's a snapshot in time. The other thing we give with that in that assessment phase, the transition readiness assessment, is a opinion of enterprise value. We tell you how your industry is trading. We tell you how those numbers then apply to your business. And we say it's trading in this range, but here's the value we think it is, and here's why. And we give you specific things that you can go take action on if you want to move that needle. The second piece, I'm giving you a way more elaborate answer, I think, than what you were looking for. But after all, I do own the podcast, and so I can keep talking as long as I'd like. You just hang up when you're done listening. So then we can, because once you understand where you are today, that's that whole understand where you are. The second piece is figuring out where you need to be. Right. And that's what we do in our second step of our 4-step process, which is what we call the roadmap for value acceleration. We help you understand what that number needs to be. And because we know where you are, we can build the bridge to get you from where you are to where you need to be. That is the strategic plan that I'm talking about. That tells you specifically what you need to do in order to achieve the value that you're looking for. Step 3 is just the relentless execution of that. By the way, we give it to you in a work plan, right? Think of it as like, if for our listeners who know, and most of our listeners would know, the entrepreneurial operating system, the book Traction, Gino Wickman, they organize in quarterly rocks. We do the same thing. Every quarter for the next X number of quarters, this is what needs to happen. Now, we don't tell you how to do it, but we tell you what needs to happen. And it's in order by dependency so that you know how to get your business there. And so then you go out and you relentlessly execute on that strategy, which is easier said than done, because, we're all caught up running our business every day. And then step 4 is you're ready to transition. So that's the advice. The advice I would give is reach out to us. It doesn't cost anything for a phone call, right? I'm on the phone every day with business owners, just talking through what we do and understanding their business. And some we can help, and frankly, there are some that we can't help. But it's worth having that conversation. So that's what I would say is the advice that I would give for a business owner that's looking to transition. Understand what it's worth now, whether it's us or some other firm or some other way to understand value. Find out what it's worth, find out what you need, and then develop a plan to get there.
Yeah, no, I like that, because you're talking about get a reality check, and a reality check doesn't happen between your ears or asking your partner or asking your life partner, right? Or asking a buddy. There's a thorough analysis that needs to be done in order to transition. So I'm curious. I didn't ask. After you sold Diagnostic Imaging, what did you do after the sale? What happened after that closed?
So I actually went to work for the company, and that's where I bought 72 more companies using that same methodology that they used, right? And rolled up that industry. We actually turned our $60 million business into $1 billion business. And at that point in 2000 was when I realized that I had 2 small children. They were 4 and 6 at the time. And I literally spent 240 nights in a hotel in the year 2000. And I said, something's got to give. I don't even know my kids' names, right? And I don't see my wife. I literally only saw my children on the weekends, and only some weekends, because I did travel on the weekends. And so I was top tier on every airline on the planet, right? And by anybody else's litmus test, you would say, gosh, what a wildly successful guy, flying first class, eating 3 great meals at wonderful restaurants, entertaining people all the time, working in these different locations, going all over the planet and internationally. But it's only glamorous to somebody who's not done that. Right. And so I realized that I needed to take a step back. And so I ultimately left the company, took a package and left the company in 2001. in March of 2001. And 60 days later, I bought the company that became ultimately Granberry, which is what you referenced earlier, the industry that we both worked in, which was the technology for restaurant retailers and wineries. But I bought that tiny little company, Diamond Touch, and ultimately turned it into Granberry through a series of additional acquisitions. Wow. And sold that 3 years later.
Fabulous. So that takes us up to just recently, because you sold that, sold Granberry recently. What are you doing now that you sold your business? You've alluded to Mastery Partners. What other color would you add to folks?
Jim, that's probably the dumbest question I've ever been asked. You're on my podcast interviewing me.
I'm asking on behalf of the audience. I mean, I know the answer to the question,
yeah.
but
got it. Yeah. So that's what we do at Mastery Partners. What I explained earlier, kind of that 4-step process. What we do is we help privately held business owners develop and execute an exit strategy. That's what we do all day long. We almost invented this space because there wasn't anybody who ever served this space before. In fact, this company, this business that I've created, Mastery Partners, was born out of my own frustration because there was nobody to help me do the things that we've had to do throughout all the years. There was nobody that would tell me what's wrong with my business. Tell me, what do I need to tweak? How do I automate things? What is this recurring revenue? How do we build that stuff? There was nobody who was telling me, here's how your industry is trading and here's how you can improve value. And so we said, well, geez, we've developed all these processes on our own by hit or miss. And by the way, everything we do is a result of doing the opposite at some point in the past, right? We've made every mistake that's possible. And we've learned from those mistakes, and we've created our own intellectual property, the TRA, the transition readiness assessment, and the roadmap for value acceleration that we use now as tools with our clients to help them understand their value and to help them understand what an exit looks like, how it feels, and then we lead them down the path. I had a conversation with a client yesterday, and the value of his business since he started working with us a year ago has doubled because he's latching onto the things. He said to me that I'm focused on the business now. The business is running better than it ever was. We have processes in place. I can step away. We've cleaned up our financials so that they're understandable. And as a result, the business is more valuable today than it was a year ago. And he said, Bronson, send anybody my way. I will give them a testimonial. This is well worth the investment of my time and my money in order to get this business in the right direction. I got to tell you, those kind of conversations just jazz me. I hear those with our clients all the time. It's make investments in the business. And this is a great place to be able to do that so that it'll benefit you in the long run. You get that satisfaction of knowing that your business is going to be ready. So take the time to go out and do that. That's what we do at Mastery Partners.
Yeah, business owners and business leaders are always told, stop just working in your business, work on your business. Then they carve out the time to work on their business and they're like, what do I do now? Right. And so it sounds like you give them the guidance in terms of what you need to do to work on their business and maximize the business value. So, all right, one last question, because this podcast is all about maximize business value. What is the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
So I knew you were going to ask me that question because I've asked it, dozens and dozens of times with other folks, and I vacillate on the answer. But I think ultimately the answer is get ready sooner than you think. Right? You never know, and you never know what's going to happen. Life happens. You never know if something's going to happen to you or one of your key people, or an offer is going to walk through the door, or you become disabled and can't work, or worse, the death of an owner is a terrible thing, right? Because it passes on to the next people who are probably not prepared to handle the business. So I say get ready sooner than you think. Even if your business, if you're going to hold your business for 20 years, that's fine. Understand what your exit value or exit needs to look like. Start preparing for it now. And that kind of starts with getting a valuation on the business, understand that value. So if I could twist it into two things, it's be ready early and understand the value of that business. They've heard that now like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times on this podcast. So maybe it'll start sinking in.
and as you're maximizing your business value, your business gets, I don't want to say easier to run, but it'll run smoother. You should have more sales, more profits, right? As you're doing all those things, your life just gets better and you're prepared, like you said, and for whenever that day comes or wherever you want that day to come.
The most common things I hear from our clients is that I'm having more fun in my business and I'm making more money in my business is becoming more valuable. It's more personally satisfying. That is a wonderful outcome for us, right? That is the most common thing we hear a year after we're working with them. Gosh, I didn't realize that it could be this good and this fun. Now I don't want to sell it. Okay, great. Then continue to harvest, right? And so go out there and do your thing. But yes, it actually does become more fun. And you said you don't think it makes it easier. I really do think it does make it easier, because even if you have processes in place for how you make decisions, right, then that makes the decision making easier. It doesn't become throwing a dart right at the board. So I do think it actually does make running the business easy. It doesn't make the business itself easier, but it makes it easier, and you can see all the way through the tunnel and see the light.
Yeah, I would say, getting back to the systems part, you don't have to start the next year with, oh, we're doing this thing again. Let's start with a blank sheet of paper. How did we do that? Like, to me, that just, I want to throw myself on the floor. Like, it's so much better to say, what did we do before? Here are all the things. Here's some tweaks we can make. Oh, we're done, right? Like, remember last year, this was so painful to figure out. So yeah, hugely in favor of that. All right. I said that was my last question, but I have a bonus question for you. So what personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble over the years?
And I was hoping you'd come up with a new one, because I have a laundry list. How much time do you have?
I'll just put my headphones down, walk away, hit the restroom, grab some lunch, come back.
Yeah, I was suspecting that you might ask me that question, because I've put you on the spot a couple of times with the very same question, and I didn't realize how hard it is to answer. But I think if I had to pick one thing, it's that something my mom said to me when I was in junior high school. She says, you see things that others don't. You have the ability, you see a tiny little change in something and you register that, and it leads you down a path toward a conclusion, right? It was why she said, I could never surprise you. Because if I was trying to surprise you, that meant I was doing something different, and you would notice that and pick up on it instantly. So I think the thing that's gotten me into the most trouble is knowing that is one of my superpowers. The first change I see, it changes the outcome, right? And I see the path all the way down. I'm not always right, but I am always stubborn. So I might predict something or get real stubborn because I've seen something that I think that is changing the outcome, and get very direct and stubborn about it. And it causes me to be, I'm not a good stubborn person. I'm argumentative. I want people to see it my way. And sometimes that makes me close off. Then, and ironically, having that superpower and then coupling that with the stubbornness shuts off my intuition to see other changes, right? And so I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's I dig in my heels too much, because I do see things that other people don't see, and I just get very stubborn about it, and it causes me to go down sometimes some argumentative paths where I've had to go back, and I have had to learn how to apologize. It's like the bile rising in my throat, right? I was wrong.
Yeah. You're like Fonzie in that episode of Happy Days where he couldn't say he was wrong, and it was I was so that's right. You're just like Henry Winkler, the Fonzie.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly, by the way, how I apologize. I go, I was wrong. And so when you hear that, you know that I was wrong, but it's just really hard.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, it's been great talking to you. How can listeners get in touch with you?
Well, right where you found this podcast, then you can just click any one of the links there. Of course, I have a couple of websites that I want to mention. It's Mastery Partners, master with a Y, masterypartners.com. There's a link on that website that right at the very top of it, it says schedule a call with Tom. It takes you right to my calendar, and you can drop in for a 30-minute or a 45-minute call directly with me at your leisure. And so go and do that. Another website that you can go to is tombronsonspeaks.com, because I do a lot of public speaking. I talk about not only my book, but other topics. You can see all those there. You can also link to me there. And so you can do that. And MBV, Maximize Business Value, MBV Mastery Class. It's our masterclass.com. You can go there and get in touch with me. So 3 websites that you can go and find me, or you can just email me at tom@masterypartners.com. My cell phone is right on the website. You can go find it there. I give so many ways for people to get in touch with me. It's because I want them to be able to do that very easily. You can call my cell phone, call me on Saturday night. Probably won't answer, but call me whenever you want to.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, thank you very much for being our guest today, and thank you for letting me host your podcast.
Well, thank you in return. I think I might name you the Jay Leno. Perhaps now because Jay Leno was the permanent guest host for Johnny Carson, right? For those of us who are old enough to remember Johnny Carson. And so you've done such a masterful job with this. I think I'm going to name you my permanent guest host. Are you open for that?
Well, I appreciate that. If it leads to as many cars as Jay Leno has, the classic cars, the garage is full of them, I'm happy to go down that path.
I'm sure that hosting my podcast was how he got his launch. Just trust me on that. Thank you for doing this.
No, happy to do it. Johnny Carson never heard the word podcast before. This was from ages gone by. So, well, like Tom said, you can find him at masterypartners.com. And of course, if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me at jim@jimroddycba.com. That's JIMRODDYCBA.com. Stands for Coach and Business Advisor. And if you do that and mention this podcast, I'll send you 2 free chapters of my book, The Walk-On Method to Career and Business Success. So again, jim@jimroddycba.com. Again, this is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow Maximize Business Value podcast wherever you found this episode. And tell your friends about the podcast as well. So until next time, Tom is back in this chair. I'm Jim Roddy, reminding you it's never too early to start planning for your ideal desired exit strategy while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.